I'd like to call the meeting of the CRIZ Authority to order in that it's past 4 o'clock, and I do want to, for the sake of least confusion, get started really promptly with our invited guest discussion with us. Maybe we'll be able to talk at least 15 minutes with Mike Johnson, who is the recently been the consultant temporary business manager, and his contract's running out on that. And I wanted him to come to talk to us about Act 47 and how that can happen and how it will happen, so that we'd have some full knowledge of what might be ahead of us. Act 47, as I pointed out at the last meeting, disqualifies the CRIZ. Yet, I also tried to point out, I think correctly, that the county, if it's a home rule county, can take it up with the same city properties on it, or the same city technique of the 130 parcels. So I don't know where we might go or could go with that, as that might come to pass. On the other hand, it looks like a choice about going the route of Act 47, but it may not be a choice, and that's what I want Michael to get into, to see how can that happen in the city of York. I in no way wish to discuss a recommendation to the city or to the mayor or express any public opinions about one way or the other about how we feel about 47. My purpose is to only talk about how 47 would impact us and how it could happen. Is that acceptable to the authority members? Yes. Okay. So, Michael?
Okay.
If you don't mind, I'll throw you right up here so we can try to beat the press instead of meet the press.
Okay,
Michael
I'll try
Johnson,
to talk quickly.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know him.
First of all, I'll say I am not an expert on Act 47, but I'll tell you what I know. Basically, I read the law probably 5 or 6 times, and each time I got a little bit further through it before I fell asleep. But it was it's a lot to read, but actually it's pretty understandable once you get into it. It's pretty straightforward. As Bob said, we have not in any way even begun to make a decision whether it's appropriate for York City. I got to stress that. What the mayor said, and this is absolutely true, is we're looking at the pros and cons of it to see, does it make sense for us? Some cities decided yes, some decided no. But we're in this evaluation phase. We started 2 weeks ago, I guess, in a little quick program with the state. It's called the Early Intervention Program, and we've had 2 previous studies in this, and we're in a 3rd one. And this is going to run probably through the end of January, and I can talk more about that if you'd like to. We're using the Pennsylvania Economy League for that study, and also they're bringing in as partners Ballard Spahr and some other really good, knowledgeable folks to it. So one of the things in that early intervention study is going to be getting their input, the experts, if you will, who've worked with other Act 47 cities, what they've seen as good and what they've seen as bad. So that's just getting started. So as I read through the law, I'll try to hit some of the high points and do it rather quickly, because it's probably more question and answer will be useful. We clearly meet the criteria for Act 47. I mean, there are a whole series of criteria, but we definitely meet 3 of the 11 criteria that I noted here. I won't go into what they are, but you can probably guess they relate to the MMO, and they relate to a negative fund balance and all those kinds of things. As Bob mentioned, there are actually 10 different groups who can request this to the state to go into Act 47. You don't just say, I want to go in, and you're in. You have to request it, and the state decides, do you qualify to go in? But there are 10 groups. Okay, one is obviously the mayor. Another is the city council, independently. Okay, the state itself, the Department of Community and Economic Development, can say, I haven't heard from these folks, but they need to go in. The auditors, if they see things in your audit, they can make that request. Creditors, debt holders, okay, if you're missing debt payments, which we have never done, they could make that request. Actually, voters, okay, if it's 10% of the voters who voted in the last election can petition the state for a municipality to go in. Pension fund beneficiaries, that sort of makes sense. You know that we make all of our pension payments, but the pension recipients get all of their checks on time. The money that goes into the pension fund, we make it on a delayed basis, is the nicest way to put it. So pension fund beneficiaries could ask city employees, if city employees haven't been paid in over 90 days, if you're really in that situation, they could make a request. Trustees of any bond issues and trustees of any pension fund. So 10 different groups could request. Again, it's not automatic that it would be granted. Then there's a whole series of procedures, as you might guess, when a request goes in. And I won't go through all the steps, but they're like 10 steps. They're public hearings, 30 days for this, 30 days for that, that sort of thing. And I think roughly it could be like a 6 to 7 month process before a real decision could be made if a request for that was made. So those are the groups that could go in. Why would anybody ever even want to go in? It sounds like, I don't know what to even call it, but it's like something that you would never want to do. Well, there are some positive things, and right off the top of my head that I can remember. You do receive priority for state funding, state projects. And the newest revisions to the law say basically there has to be a notification go out to all departments in the state once a year saying City X is in Act 47, give them priority. Okay, so that is, it's not automatic that you get funds, but you're to get priority for it.
Michael?
Yes?
Can you just drop the hammer and tell us the one exception to that? The one exception to priority.
Oh, yes, the one exception. The one you're most interested in here. CRIZ, a CRIZ municipality, you cannot be a CRIZ municipality at the current time if you are in Act 47. And I called today, actually, on the way over here and said, why is this? And talked to someone at the state, and perverted as it may be, their logic is, since you are eligible for priority on everything else in terms of funding, the one thing that they're going to carve out is CRIZ and say you're not eligible to that because other municipalities are not eligible for things that you would be eligible for in Act 47. That's sort of like, I mean, that's sort of the logic that they have. So, and again, if I'm going too much
Michael,
above,
may I invite the authority also to interrupt you now and then
please,
with a question as they might
fine.
have one? Okay.
I'm almost done, really. The only other big advantage, if you will, to being in Act 47, I would say you do have some revenue opportunities if you choose to exercise them. That is tax increases above what would otherwise be allowed. Not that we would want to exercise, certainly on the real estate side, any increases there, but it would be available. The one possibility that an Act 47 plan might consider is similar to what we recently did with the, I will say, modest increase in the earned income tax of 1/4%. You may remember, if you saw it in the paper, we generated $2.5 million roughly from 1/4% bump up in the earned income tax. And if you are in Act 47, you do have the ability to increase that as well, as long as you are in Act 47. Again, it's just a possible revenue opportunity. Personally, I think the main advantage to Act 47 is neither of those, but it's basically that the state is paying for a lot of very experienced people, okay, to work at no charge for the city to look at every possibility there is for improving the financial situation. And I always stress to people, I don't know the answer to everything, believe me. And, you know, we've all worked with professionals in different lines of work. And these are individuals who have a lot of experience and a lot of savvy. And it's basically available at no cost. And they continue with you the whole time you're in Act 47. If you're in there for 5 years, you know, these folks are around and working with you. I talk to the folks in Reading, and basically every week or every other week, they're in communication with some of these experts in different fields and all. So it's, some people have a hard time understanding that, but I mean, I think that's probably the biggest advantage, quite frankly. But disadvantages, someone who I'm very friendly with, used the term shame and stigma. And is there enough of a shame and stigma, if there is such a thing, to being designated that in Act 47? I venture to say the man on the street doesn't know Act 47 from 48 or 46, but some others do. I will say rating agencies like it, okay, because they view it that the city is facing up to its financial situation and it will be solved and will improve probably the debt rating of the city. So, you know, there is this shame and stigma, if you will. Perhaps on the flip side, it's a commitment. I mean, there's a coordinator appointed by the state. I've talked with some of these coordinators, I've talked with the state, and I've talked with the cities that have used them, and they say it's a very collaborative approach. It's not a dictator coming in saying this is what thou shalt do, but there is a coordinator appointed, and that coordinator does produce a plan. Council, of course, must approve the plan. If council doesn't approve the plan, council can prepare its own plan. That goes back to the coordinator for approval. So there are all these little different things that are set up in case there's disagreement with a plan. So anyway, I'll stop talking because it's probably better to answer some questions, but just in general, that's...
Michael, first, before you stop, would you mind telling us the specific expenditure side line items that cause this problem? What are the things that we can't overcome?
Yeah, well, I think I'd recommend, by the way, if anybody is so inclined, really the official source for the city financials is the audit. And I know it's boring, but if you flip to a summary page or two and look at the one summary that'll show the major revenues and the major expenses, and we'll show that for your general fund, and that's really the only one you have to look at. You'll see where it is, and it's basically public safety. I mean, it is. You know, out of a whatever, $38 million budget, I could look there, but probably 28 of it is public safety. Not just salaries, but pensions and everything else, healthcare, everything that's related to the individuals and the departments that include, of course, police and fire. And the increases that have occurred over the last, 10 years or so have been in that area as well. If you look at the general government expenses, they've actually shrunk, absolutely shrunk, not just as a percent of the total. So, yeah, Bob, that's where
Thank you. I'd like to come back to that later, but again, Charles, my vice chair, I've been leaning on him because of my hearing situation, which is getting better because I had my operation and other stuff. I'll tell you about that later. But Charles, if you would, and Charles, by the way, knows an awful lot about this government stuff. In any event, so he's our resident expert, so I'd like him to continue the facilitating.
I concur.
Here.
I'm going to do the same thing Mike just did. I'll duck and say I've fallen asleep a couple of times reading the same act.
Yeah.
Mike, getting to this question of public safety, across the state, the common problem are successful arbitration awards that are won by police and fire. There's long been talk about the arbitrator panel having a tilt that's pro the employee groups. But notwithstanding that, and I think it's Act 101.
111.
111, yeah.
Yep.
Notwithstanding that, Act 111 still seems to reign. Does Act 47 give you any maneuverability around Act 111?
You get different opinions on that, Charlie, quite frankly. If you read the letter of the law of Act 47, you will see in there that a collective bargaining award cannot exceed what is allowed for within the plan that has been approved. Now, I think that that's probably more on an aggregate basis, so probably the plan would say total public safety expenditures, okay, shall not exceed X percent growth or even X dollar amount. So technically in the law, that's what you'll find if you dig far enough. I will say that's been challenged, excuse me, in court. Yeah. As you probably know, and
City of Scranton.
Yes, yeah. Scranton, yeah, absolutely. And it's really anybody's call. What I will say, the folks from Ballard Spar that I mentioned, as they talk to us about collective bargaining and possibly Act 47, they will say that their experience has been that the other side of the table is aware of the potential, okay, and for more draconian measures, and therefore they have found that does improve your stance. I don't think it's because of the law, though. Yeah. Quite frankly, I think it's just they know that the jig is up, the city is serious, and they're going to solve this problem. So it's not really a legal. I guess, Charlie, my answer is it's not. I don't think so much a legal thing
it's what the lawyers call suasion.
Suasion, exactly.
Yes, thank you, Mike. That's my question.
Okay, certainly.
Mike, are you aware of any of the municipalities in PA that are in 47 as a result of action other than the mayor or
Oh boy.
one of these 10 groups that you mentioned?
I have never seen that mentioned, so I'm sorry, I'm not, Dave. I don't know.
Mr. Confer, there are. Marita did give us an example. It was a smaller one. Newcastle, their voters actually put them in, but she did not give us a breakdown on or percentages. Maybe that's where we're looking at there with your question. So I know there are examples, but I don't have any kind of quantified numbers on that.
Would everybody please use the microphone, because again, this month we're being recorded, and only the mic picks it up best, or at least consistent.
I know that, if this helps, Dave, I know that they're with one of the larger cities. It may be Reading. Don't hold me to that. Anyway, the council did not agree with the plan, and ultimately the collective bargaining position that was taken by the mayor was contra to the plan, and that was stopped by the coordinator. Okay, so the hammer did come down in that case. It was so, but I can't give you the details, sorry. But yeah. Okay, yeah. So I guess I would just stress, and as you talk with others, I'd encourage you just to be sure that folks understand that this is not a foregone conclusion, and we're going to look at it seriously, but if there is a way to accomplish the same thing, and we have the confidence that city government will accomplish the same thing, which is also an if, that there may not be a reason to go in. So anyway, we're looking at it. That's all I can say. Okay. All right. So anyway,
a couple of things I wanted to go back to. One was that exception of the CRIZ, because we have all the other things that we get preference on. They take away the best one. The CRIZ is for development, economic development. I see no equal to that. But I would want you to tell us who's behind, or what's behind the current talk about 47. Is there an outside risk here, or is it strictly council and or mayor that are bringing this to the table?
Actually, if you look back at previous audits, every audit has what's called a management discussion and analysis, where it gives the city a chance to, in words, spell out their positions and their feelings about the financial condition. Act 47 has probably been, in the last 4 or 5 of those audits. So it has been on the radar for quite a while, Bob. And as far as what is moving it closer, I can't really say. I will say that if you just look at the books, at the results, our general fund balance is negative. And you say, well, how's that? That means your liabilities are greater than your assets. It's not real complicated. And what that really means is that there are some liabilities that, as of the end of the year, were not paid. Okay, so they're liabilities, but the cash hasn't been put out. And you probably know the biggest one is our pension payment that we are required to make annually, which he's going to tell me if I got it wrong, but I think it's $7 million at the end of 2013 was a liability that should have been paid by that point, had not been paid. And we're working that down a little bit this year. I think I had some numbers here, and it's actually improved somewhat, but that we do make those payments late, and therefore at the end of the year, it's still a liability. So you had asked, I think, Bob, the question earlier is, some people say, was the city bankrupt? Is it broke? Well, what all that means is, if you were to pay every one of those liabilities at the end of the year, and all the assets are worth what you say they're worth, of course cash is worth what it is, but there are other assets too, then you could say we're a bankrupt. We could not make those payments. We have control over making those payments, though.
So could the pension beneficiaries throw it into 47?
Absolutely.
And is there any threat of that right now?
They could I'm sorry, Bob. They could petition for it. They couldn't throw it in. They could go to the state and say, we think that this municipality should be.
But that unfunded balance is what they would have as the momentum to do that. Are they considering that?
I don't know that they are. I would be surprised if they are, but I don't know that they are. Again, we're not. All pension checks are mailed on time. I keep emphasizing that. It's not that they are not receiving what they are due. It's just that our unfunded liability, the fancy term, our pensions are only funded at 58%. So they're about halfway funded of where they would be if they were fully funded to cover future liabilities on an actuarial basis. And that, by the way, that status, our distressed pension status, is what allowed us to pass that increase in the earned income tax. That was the only reason we were allowed to do that. So it's like $65 million underfunded. And the amazing thing to me was that in 1995, what's that, about 20 years ago, there was debt was issued, and the pensions were fully funded with that new debt at that time. So all of this has occurred since then.
I want to make some points of observation that Eugene De Pasquale's last report on his audit of municipal pension funds had found 547 municipalities in Pennsylvania that are in the same status as York.
Yeah.
So it's not as though, we're all alone. And the other thing is that I'm familiar with when we defeased all the pension debt, and that was back in the 90s, and then these problems have arisen going forward. But there was another important period in time historically in 1984 when the legislature passed Act 205, which is a tax on casualty insurance and fire insurance, and created a huge fund, which is also administered by the Auditor General, and began to make annual payments. And at the same time, the MMOA, minimum municipal obligation, came into being because that same act created the pension study commission that's based in Harrisburg. And I believe, I don't know, I'll ask Michael Dowry, what is the amount of money that we get annually from the Auditor General's office for our...
The state pension aid?
Yeah.
It's roughly $2 million.
$2 million.
$2 million. Well, there have been discussions underway in Harrisburg to try to improve Act 205, to try to add more money to it and get more money, especially coming towards distressed communities. And the second thing about the number of pensions in Pennsylvania, I don't know that my colleagues would know this, but there are 3,450 separate pension systems in the state of Pennsylvania. We beat the whole country. We have, as a matter of fact, we have 40% of all the municipal pension systems in the entire United States are based in Pennsylvania. And those pensions are also an outgrowth of the Act of 1984, Act 205, because as revenues started to flow to local governments to help them with their pensions, Cities like York were greatly benefited by it, but little towns and boroughs here and there got a windfall. And no thought was given to what would happen, that they would all rush out, go to a local insurance agent, and buy a pension to cover 6, 10, 15 employees. The annual administrative costs for running all of those pensions across the state are $34 million. It isn't too effective. So, having laid out all of those basic facts, you can see why this is ripe for reform. And it may not be tomorrow or the next day, but there are efforts underway in Harrisburg to try to improve that act and to try to get more money going to communities like York.
Ladies, any questions?
What's our pension? What's our payment that's due this year for 2014?
$8 million, plus another 3.5 for the interest or the payments on the pension debt, roughly. So 11.5 pension-related payments this year. The 1995 debt that was issued, obviously, we got to pay on that every year, and that's like $3.5 million as well.
But the interest wouldn't be a default, would it? I mean, that'll be paid.
Excuse me?
The interest would be paid.
Oh, yeah, I'm just saying the total cost related to pensions for the city of York is the 8 plus the payment on the pension bonds that were issued. But yeah, and that, just real quick, this could have happened 4 years ago, except as a result of the downturn in the market, a lot of pension plans were really in deep you-know-what. And so the state basically, and this was through, I guess, an amendment or whatever to 205, Act 205, it allowed a 4-year period where you didn't have to make your full MMO payment. You had to only make 75% of what you otherwise would have made. Otherwise, this same thing would have hit 4 years ago, basically. So we, as with most municipalities, took advantage of that. And but anyway, it was a time that's it had to come. Okay, so yeah.
Mike, given your skills in the financial world, have you had enough time to look at how the city's investments have been managed, how what we're getting for what we're paying for, and whether or not there was some sort of fantasies built into things? I know that the Auditor General recently, in putting out that study and saying that there were 540 some pension systems across the state, he got really hard on the fact that quite a few of them had been based on really highfalutin ideas about what the return was going to be. And that, and that the management of these funds is to some extent suspect.
Well, I have not specifically studied. I've been to the pension meetings where the professional managers and the actuaries are present and talk about the performance. I hadn't seen anything crazy in the composition of the assets within the pension funds, certainly. I've gone over with them the assumptions. In order to come up with what the MMO is, obviously there's a series of assumptions you have to make in terms of how fast are salaries going to grow, how fast are the pension funds going to grow. All of these things have to be made, and that affects dramatically the MMO. Okay, and in our case, the assumption for growth in the assets is at 8%. Most municipalities are there 8. Some have dropped to 7.5. Obviously, if lower that is, the higher the MMO is, because your investments are not going to grow as fast to pay those pension obligations. So, but that, I won't get into it. There are other assumptions that basically offset that, so we don't think that that's an unreasonable assumption to make. And our actuary doesn't. I mean, he's, it's his professional reputation on the line. So I didn't see anything, Charlie, crazy in any of the assumptions. There are 3 separate funds: police, fire, and then kind of all other funds. There we could at some point go out for bid, obviously, to see if we're paying a market rate on the fees that are collected. They're not insignificant, a couple $100,000 probably. So I have to look that up. Don't quote me, but it's in terms of the management itself. They measure themselves versus various benchmarks. I mean, every meeting you see, here was our performance, here are the benchmarks, and there's never been anything that I've seen that's crazy on that.
Well, it's thanks to the, if that's the right word, to the downturn of 2007 and 2008, there's been massive reevaluation of pension fund investments, how they're made, what they're made in. The leader across the country is CalPERS, the California State Employees Pension System, which is just huge. And, they're the elephant in the room, and when they move around, everybody else moves with them. And they've recently done some interesting things. A lot of these pension funds were involved with hedge funds. And CalPERS announced they're walking away from hedge funds.
Yeah.
But that had gotten very sexy for a while. And down at our level, York is sort of always running to catch up. So some guy comes to us with a plan and says, "Oh, look, everybody's in hedge funds. You guys should get in hedge funds." So it's that kind of stuff is happening right now. It's really a big deal.
Well, from what I've seen, Charlie, the boards that we have that are monitoring these guys, it's a very conservative group of people. Okay, let me put it this way. I don't really think that there's anything crazy going on in terms of the types of assets. I should mention, I keep throwing more bad news on, we are required to set aside money for future pension obligations, all right? We are not required to set aside money for future health care obligations. We pay as you go. I think it was around $2.5 million last year. But if we were required to fund our obligation, which we must pay under contract, that would be a significant additional MMO. Not that I don't have any indication that that's going to happen, but I will say there are new accounting standards that you're going to start seeing that on the balance sheet, that obligation, the full obligation, and it's big. It's big. So, some municipalities, I'm not saying Pennsylvania, but other municipalities that are in better shape have started fully funding obligations. They're just as real an obligation as a pension obligation. So anyway, I will say that the last thing I'll say in summary, whether it's in Act 47 or out of Act 47, personally, I am really pleased that the city is facing up to its obligations here, and whether I think the mayor is very serious about not kicking the can down the road, as has been often said, and that has proven to be counterproductive in many cases. And we're serious about solving this problem, and we're also serious, and it's not next year, but about reducing the real estate tax rate in this city. I mean, I'm a resident, most of you are. I mean, it's got to change. So, we must be more conservative in how we're spending our money, and it's going to happen. They're going to be tough decisions. I guess it's the 18th when the mayor's proposal of a balanced budget is going to come out, and I don't know everything that's in it, certainly, but it's going to be tough. It's not anything like what we've seen in the past. So, but we're facing up to it, and whether it's additional state help or wherever we're going to get this from, it's going to become obvious to a lot of people that financially we need assistance. Okay. So anyway, that's.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming, and the press will probably be outside waiting for you.
I'll go out this door then. How's that?
But
No,
you
fine.
obviously have upheld the standards of a good banker in enlightening us, and I appreciate that very much. We're former colleagues, so I need to say that.
But we're in your building, Bob.
No,
This
we're
was-
in our building. I always,
Our building.
when I visualized this, or actually when I saw it
Right.
come into fruition, I thought this would be a great municipal building. It's got to belong to the city someday. And
There
look,
you go. There you
here
go.
we are. Thank you,
Behold.
Michael.
Thank you all. Take care.
I want to take a couple of personal minutes, and I will make it only a couple of personal. This is an amazing thing about the hearing, you know, that it really is working as a result of the surgery I had, which was a cochlear implant. But I want to show you. See, this is, I'll take it off. See that? This part is a computer processor. So you think about that as the big server under your desk or in the back room. And inside my head is like a laptop. And the laptop receives the information that this picks up. And the laptop will then digitize the sound and then pushes the sound through my cochlear and to a computer chip that sends electrode frequency waves to the brain. Wait a minute, you can't talk till I put this back on. So, and it's a magnet. So the magnet goes onto my head and connects to the laptop inside.
Are you now the $6 billion man?
I am. Well, 5.5 million. But just to be quick, that is working. The surgery was a success, and then I was without it after surgery for 3 weeks because they wait till some healing and then tune it up. Really looking forward to next Tuesday when they actually turn me up more. It's worked out beautifully, and I just am anxious to hear more. And they've kept it soft purposefully because of all the stuff that are side effects or ways that you would have trouble hearing. And I told you at the last meeting that you would maybe sound like cartoon characters. You don't. I was saved from that. And so you don't have to do any animation. However, in the beginning, I couldn't tell whether it was a girl or a man talking, and that's improving. So anyway, I will be able to function again soon, and if there is a CRIZ, I'll be with you. I will not have to be resigning for non-functionality. In the meantime, I'm still very grateful to Charles for his help at the last meeting, and as this one continues, for that help. So thank you very, very much. And Michael, thanks for being here. What I'd like to do is to get us into 2 or 3 of these items on the agenda, which would be the status of the department. That's in the press as well as to whether it'll in fact even be a department, and the legislation going forward. And in the legislation going forward, remember that Michael said that there's shame and stigma. So when that comes up, whenever Charles tells you that's going to happen, then it's a toss-up that maybe I've turned negative on it, frankly. I don't know that we're in a good position for the reasons Charles will tell you, in addition to the idea that the talk of a 47, or in fact, if there is a 47, what might happen to the CRIZ. So I'd like to take a few minutes before Charles starts with that to thank Leonardo for coming to York. He's uplifted my life. I'm so saddened at his departure. I fully understand. I think you'd have done a fantastic job in this city, and I understand where you're going is a tremendous opportunity. And I've not talked to anybody in-house here, but I can imagine that the personality that you've exposed to me is the very same leadership quality and capability that I've observed personally with you. So you want to speak to your departure or anything? Did you change your mind?
No, I just want to say thank you, and I've enjoyed working with each of you here, and it's been a good experience. Certainly, I'm looking forward to I guess the next chapter. This one was a little briefer than I anticipated, but again, it's been a excuse me, I guess a good brief ride, and don't want to belabor the comments so we can discuss the business on the agenda. So, but thank you.
Okay. Now, the third thing in there was, of course, the update of the list. I think it's important that we still embrace what is out there and what we would rush to presentation application with if we do have that opportunity. So, Charles, if you could begin with the legislative, what we think we know about that.
Well, the post-election scenario in Harrisburg is that the champion of the bill that included York is a senator by the name of Pileggi. And since 2006, he has been the Republican leader of the Senate. And in this past election, the Senate Republican complement grew, and they increased their majority they increased it by 10, so that there are now 30 Republicans to 20 Democrats. But in the case of Senator Pileggi, this increase has not been beneficial. The increase has tilted the internal balance within the caucus towards the man who has been his governing partner, a senator from Jefferson County by the name of Scarnati. And Scarnati announced that he was going to resume his efforts that he had made back in 2006 to partner with the senator from Center County, from the State College area by the name of Jake Corman. Senator Pileggi had defeated Corman by only 2 votes at the time. And then ever since then, since 2006, they've had this alliance going forward. It's also true that Senator Scarnati is a Southeasterner. And generally speaking, the Republican members from the Southeast tend to be more moderate or more liberal. One of the factors that we in your county will be interested to note, given the ascension of Senator Wagner, is that these senators have no problems cooperating with the labor movement. Almost all of them, in fact, are very, very tightly bound up with the labor movement. And there's been some fantastic things done in the Southeast. There's been 3 refineries in the South Philadelphia area, one in Marcus Hook. They're all on the Delaware. They're not all in Philadelphia, but they certainly employ a lot of people. And the building trades and the steelworkers unions are the unions that represent those refineries. And Pileggi, who's the former mayor of the city of Chester in Delaware County, was one of the leaders in cooperating with labor in creating some really brilliant strategies that have saved every one of those refineries. You would think that all of those things would breed him kudos, but not given the philosophical bent of the caucus. So Scarnati put out a letter announcing that he was going to be backing Jake Corman, and it looks like it's a fait accompli. So Bob and I have been going back on the phone about this, and there's really no way to talk about it except that we sound like a bunch of handicappers trying to handicap the Kentucky Derby. There's just no way to know what all this means for CRIZ. It's probably the most conservative approach would be to say it's over. That our guy, he is still going to be the majority leader during the lame duck session up until this coming Wednesday, when they will have the caucus election, at which point he will be deposed.
I thought that was tomorrow.
Wednesday. Oh, sorry, this Wednesday, yeah, tomorrow. Well, this Wednesday, tomorrow. Yeah, I apologize. I'm sitting here acting like it's not tomorrow. It is tomorrow, yeah. I just, at this point, I don't want to babble, and I'll try to say a few cogent things, some that would potentially give us hope. It has been rumored that Pileggi's whole reaction to all of this has been to find a whole new balance and to say, well, I'm not interested in being a senator anymore. I'm interested in being a Supreme Court justice. And the implication of that is that he's going to turn to his fellow Republicans and say, okay, I'm going away nice. It's not going to be any kind of fight. I'm not going to get the Southeastern Republicans all riled up. And what I want you guys to do is to back me to the hilt when I run for the Senate. I'm for the Supreme Court. In 2015, there's going to be 3 Supreme Court openings. And so that's going to be, at least within the inside baseball of Pennsylvania politics, that's going to be very interesting. So that might happen, and then he just goes away nice, and, you know, but maybe also he says, oh, before I go, there's one thing I would really, really, really like to get, and that's CRIZ. And perhaps they'll be in a sort of positive, generous, thank you, mode, and he'll get it. And if he gets it, we get it. You know, it's that simple, because the bill's all racked up. That's it. That's the story. Otherwise, he just might go out in a kind of a wave of recrimination. I know that the Southeastern Republicans are not happy. There's enough of them that if they walked over to the Democrats, they could create a new majority over there. There's 5 or 6 of them. And so how he gets treated in the short term could be important, and possibly, again, going back to this mode of generosity, it might happen. That's it, guys. I don't have any more intelligence than that.
Okay, well, of course, we were tied at the hip with Pileggi because we drafted the bill. Within, lobbyists, and there's an awful lot of background stuff that went on, and had this survived the cuts of the budget and the negotiations, if it would have been a slam dunk, and we would have had the credits. And without him, we don't have such a connection for an ongoing credits. And everybody else wants to get in on the credits, so there's a lot of competition. Without it, I don't think one could survive anyway if it was outside of the Pileggi model that was originally suggested. Not one that Charles, though, if you would take it over to the House, now Stan Sailor's in that one as well, and he's been our other.
Yeah, I just don't know what to say about Stan, except that I think he may just wind up exactly where he is, and that might be good for us going forward, but not necessarily here in the short term in the lame duck. There are those who say that Stan's expectations that he will rise up and become the leader of the caucus are a little too lofty, and he's just not going to make it. And
he's against Reed. Is Reed?
yeah, there's a guy by the name of Reed who seems to have a fair number of votes, and that's, I can't see into it any more than that. That he's in a battle, and he's going to have to see if he can win it.
Well, Charles, what in that battle? If he loses that battle, does he still retain the majority whip?
Yeah, well, I don't see that there's any reason for him to, wind up with less. I just don't know about that. I don't. Is there somebody else who's gunning for whip and wants to try to knock Stan off? I don't know. I just don't know.
Well, it just occurred to me, though, that Kevin, our own elected representative, was very active on our behalf and very vocal and very amenable to continued conversations and inclusion, bipartisan. And he was asked to back off of that by Tarzai, and he said he would if Tarzai put him on the committee. I don't know what committee or task force that is, and it's about the CRIZ.
That I don't know about. Normally the positions of a member are not in the purview of the opposite party. Occasionally, oh, by the way, Tarzai is destined to become speaker because Sam Smith is retiring. And so that is what's opening up the leader's role. Smith is leaving as speaker. He's retiring. Tarzai is going to move up. The word is that Tarzai, the tradition in the House, that's where I work. That's where I have deeper roots than the Senate. But the tradition in the House has often been that the Speaker ascends and also ascends above the partisan fray. He may be a former leader, but once he begins to preside, he's presiding over all the members, He has to honor their requests. He has to play by the rules. He has to let people speak as they're appropriately recognized. And, he can't be jamming the members on a partisan basis. So, but there have been speakers in the past, both Democrat and Republican, who, when they ascend to the speakership from leader, don't let go of all of that power, and they hold on to it very dearly. Word is that Terzai is that kind of guy, and that he is the guy who is working in tandem with Reed. And so that's why our guy Stan is being outmaneuvered. Terzai is using his greater power with the caucus. As for cooperation, we got a great tradition in York County. It goes back many decades, and they get together and they deal. Doesn't matter Republican or Democrat, So that they'll keep doing that going forward.
Well, we don't know what we have in Wagner, though, so don't know how that's going to work out. But anyway, you have everything Charlie and I know about all that stuff, and I just want to know if you have any questions or additions you want to. Okay, well, Charles, would you carry us on then through the Economic Development Department status?
Yeah, I have a
and
comment.
Some prospective
Mr. Chairman?
stuff.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I have a comment. Is there anything positive in any of this?
I've mentioned in my introduction of it that I had only currently become negative because of the 47 and because of this changing leadership and because of being knocked out. I was really positive about believing we would have this before that session ended. And the things that are happening now, I don't hold very high hopes. So the positive thing would be, how do we move forward with the county? Or if the county's going to do this, are they going to do it through that's probably the next conversation, Industrial Development Corporation, the county DCED. It's a whole other animal, but I don't see any positive here.
Yeah, I don't either. We go down through this. There's no legislation pending. All of the things you just enumerated. 47, Sailor, Pileggi, we're like I don't know, pick your metaphor.
Well, there is.
Man without a country.
There was an election. And a guy we all know is about to become governor, and I just don't quite know how to factor all of that in. I just really don't.
Well, I have good feedback from Tom Wolf, and I had to read between the lines of what he said, though, so I won't bother to repeat it here, but he sounded to me to be very positive if there was legislation approved, because he's the guy that would, along with the DCED secretary and the Secretary of Revenue, would make the choice of any applicants. And any bill that comes up might well include competition rather than just York and Chester. I'm not even positive about York and Chester being named, other than an acceleration of the 2016 appointment of CRIZs that is already approved and enabled. So Tom, I think, would do that, and what he sounded like to me was very positive. He thought that Tom Corbett was not in our corner for that if we were on the table. And so us having a governor there, I'd be very hopeful, but he doesn't make legislation. That has to come from the House and the other elected officials. Okay, and also, Michael, when we give him a chance, is probably going to tell you we don't have any money anyway to do much of anything, and so that's a problem. But rather than get into that at the moment, I'd rather have Charles discuss what is the status of this Economic Development Department.
You got me confused now. I really don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here.
Well, pardon me?
What is this item that I'm supposed to be discussing?
The status of the City Economic Development Department. Well, of course, we have no director.
Well, these gentlemen are going to address that. Thank you, if you will.
Before we get into that, if we can take care of a matter of business, if we can adopt the September 9th meeting minutes.
I was going to say that to the end, but if you think that's important, we'll go ahead and do that. I mean, if you think it's important at the moment. Has anybody read the minutes or have any additions, deletions, corrections? Additions, deletions, corrections?
I so move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved.
Thank you. As far as the current status of the Economic Development Department, pretty much as with every city service right now, and I see that everyone is on the edge of their seats, we don't know. Next week, over this next week, a lot is going to happen, develop. There is tremendous work being done behind the scenes, and I'm pretty confident at this point that the Economic Development Department will be okay. There were discussions that came out pretty much at the council level, not at the administration level. There were discussions that came out of possibly eliminating that department and working in conjunction with the county. But I think council has since realized that the cost savings that they thought was there really isn't. We're talking about maybe 2.5 positions, and the bulk of the budget is really the projects. So if you're going to say you're not going to support any projects, okay, doesn't really make sense. It's counterproductive. But what they thought was $1 million savings really just isn't there. So those talks have died down, and I think the research that's being done with CDBG and Shriver's working on some things, the administration's working on some things. I think they're going to be okay. We'll know more November 18th.
Well, does anybody else have any questions? I don't at this point.
I just like to say that I think we should maintain a city economic development department. I don't mind being on record with that. I see us in competition with the County Economic Development Corporation. I don't think we're compatible. I think that just like realtors, people are steered away from the city for any variety of reasons because it's easier to sell. I think we have to work hard to get what we can get. If we're a CRIZ, we have influence in that. If we're not a CRIZ, then we have our personal influences elsewhere. But this is not much money. The only savior that the city has is to get more revenues from taxes. And most of the programs, other than the CRIZ, relieve the beneficiary of any real estate taxes or forego taxes for some periods of time. That doesn't help us. And so if those things happen outside the city, that lowers the economic opportunity for the citizens of the city to get better jobs out of more jobs that would come to pass. I don't want to give any speech here, but I want to say that I think it's like throwing away the treasurer of the company because you want to save money. You know, somebody's going to have to count the pennies and see that they go where they belong. I think an economic development department is urgently important. Michael probably would go on and say, well, even if we have a CRIZ, we don't have any money for the resources that the mayor has promised us, through me, I guess. Don't want to nail her down, but she said that we can use the department for what we need, and we need it for consultants and presentations and all of that stuff. Well, I suppose we can shave that down ourselves rather than give up, and get a different kind. We don't have to get outside professionals. We have professional volunteer type and ad hoc committee opportunities. I think we could even Xerox the economic projection model that was made by the previous presentation and send it in. I mean, it just looks pretty. Who the heck up there is going to be any smarter than us? And we can't figure it out, so they won't be able to figure it out anyway. It just looks pretty. So I think that those kind of things I'd rather deal with. I think those are smaller problems as to whether or not we have enough money to get a consultant For instance, to give you an example, I don't think we need to do bonding. That costs a lot of money and has some upfront costs. We can do loans. We can sit down with bankers. Many developers bring their own bankers. We could do these as loans, and we take the loan, and we lease the properties to the owners and not issue a bond. But you need some kind of, if there's going to be a tax-exempt status for it, then there's certain procedures that have to be, if certain procedures that are going to be required to be a bond. So it's going to take time. Anyway, I think that we can do all that, and I appreciate your note. Thanks. I knew that. Okay. So that's what I want to say about that. And Michael, you want to say anything more? I mean, I'm still going to look to you. I'm going to be a pain in the butt, like I suggested to the mayor and you. I would be right up front to look for that help.
Understood. I think, I guess, to elaborate more on the budget talks, we started out this process in September with a $7 million gap between expected revenue and projected expenses. Now we're at about a $3 million gap, but that $4 million adjustment has cost us about 30 positions so far. So one person taking on the responsibilities of 2 full-time jobs, that's happening throughout every department. So what the staff makeup is going to look like come January 1, I'm a little nervous, to be frankly honest with you. So what resources are going to be available to you staff-wise? I can't go on record and make any false promises, but what has me concerned the most is the payment of the outside consultants. The baseline year testing alone was very expensive in the other cities, so it's a concern. Right now, it's definitely a concern.
Okay, well, those are challenges I look forward to. I'd rather be in place, trying to manage them, than out of place and having no effort being made towards it. So then I would like the deeded air rights. Could you acquire a copy of the former air rights, or the only air rights that exist, on a deed in the city, and that's the building across the street. First Family now owns, that York Federal owned. My group created air rights above that property. The reason I'm raising this is I'd like it to be a document to give you example of what can be done to create land. And this vacant parking lot accommodation of this building has been sitting there as the largest open single parcel space in the city, and right smack downtown in your judicial and your now municipal seat. So I think you can create something to go on up over the parking lot, still have your parking, but create a new taxpayer and more jobs there. So I'd like the authority to at least have a copy of what air rights looks like. Okay. I'd also like to be, I guess, a bit more insistent, unless you already have something to hand us about the minority inclusion. Do you have anything?
No, I don't have anything to hand you. I think that's right back into the previous discussion where it can be done. It's just a matter of how is it going to be paid for.
Okay. Do you know of any way to solicit other municipality or development efforts that prioritize by document their guidelines and programs for minorities and women? Can we find somebody and just copy it so we can look at it?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Can't somebody just do an internet search? I mean, there have to be hundreds of these things out on the internet.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
I don't think anybody has to go create something
No,
or
I
call
don't.
somebody in
Right.
Hagerstown or Frederick or Harrisburg. Just do an internet search.
I guess a couple of things on that.
Yeah, maybe you can help us out too, because one of the last things that Mike Newsom said when he was stepping down from chair of the foundation was that going forward, he wanted to carve out something new in that direction. I know he's been very busy, as all of us have been, helping our friend, but is he going to get back to that? Are we going to be able to hear or benefit from that?
It's not something he and I have talked about.
Oh, okay.
But I'd be happy to just go do an internet search and email
Oh, sure,
people
yeah.
a couple of examples of a policy like this.
I was just going to add a couple of things on this. One, I mean, we have conducted some research, had several phone calls, and one of the things, not to say that there's not any minority or women-owned policies out there, because there are, but there is a trend that's moving more towards, I guess the term being race neutral, and as opposed to specifically saying, again, minority or what have you, it's looking at more so maybe it's a revenue or a small business type program, and part of it gets into then having, if you start looking at minority or women, was there a disparity study that was done prior to, which again, all of those things start getting into dollars and consultants or what have you. And so again, there has been some work, but I think part of it gets back into being very specific. If we were to say, again, minorities, women-owned businesses versus, as an example, local small business, and have it tied to a revenue figure as opposed to specifically a gender or race perspective.
Yeah, it doesn't. I've done some research on this even before the CRIZ had arrived, the CRIZ authority had arrived, and because we were looking at something for the city, and you can't just copy someone else's ordinance or someone else's law or somebody else's regulations. The federal courts right now have been very clear that you have to have a specific study done that shows that there is the disparity, that minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, that they have been actually discriminated against in order to put a policy like this in place. Just in the last couple months, out of DC, the federal court overturned 2 such programs. I think within the last 2 years, there was a case out of Philadelphia where Philadelphia had a program that was overturned. So you have to have specific evidence done and the research to back it up that shows that there has been a disparate impact on minorities and that this program is directly addressing that problem. And it's addressing it in the smallest way it can. And all those things cost money.
Perhaps unless you do it in the way that the director suggested. If it's race neutral and it's local and tied to revenue stream, then you're not specifically picking out race or gender-based criteria.
I like to pursue it as far as we can legally and try to prepare ourselves. And my manner of copying was merely to just have a starting point of thought process. I don't think our thought's been deep enough yet. Okay, then the only other item on here, Charles, would be of course, the return visit of PFM is a moot point if we don't get a CRIZ. That was really interesting to have them here, and they offered to come back. They really are knowledgeable and opened my eyes up to a lot of other stuff. Do we want to at least get some comment on what projects might be newly imported to our list, if any?
I would just say that in all honesty, right now, from a staff perspective, we have not added a lot of additional projects. And part of it has been really comes down to 2 reasons. One has been the focus and attention placed on the budget. And then second, the uncertainty coming out with CRIZ being imminent from the legislature. And right now it looking more like applications being accepted kind of back to 2016, which was originally the case. And so from a staff perspective, we just have slowed down efforts just due to those 2 primary reasons.
There are some potential projects that are just coming up on their own. Like Josh Hankey has options on 2 or 3 big buildings on West Market Street, that unit block that is so in need of help. So in addition to his Royal Square stuff, he's moving over. And I know he's got some money from Mr. Appel. I don't know what his deal is, more than he's trying, and he's doing some nice work. So I think there are places out there we could help that aren't necessarily coming from the Economic Development Department.
Well, I was going to
It
say...
doesn't have to come through you.
Well, no, I mean...
For if we ended up with the CRIZ
No,
funding, does
I
it?
think to your point there, I would say, I guess even broadly, there are several projects that are being worked, but in terms of right now saying this project is on, we've added this project to the CRIZ list, we just haven't specifically revisited the CRIZ list to add additional projects just because of some of the uncertainties with, again, in Harrisburg and then relative to the budget conversations. But I think to your point, you're correct. Josh is very active right now on the unit block. In addition to, we've just recently started with the MPP grant that we've got through the YWCA that's also working with Josh on Royal Square and the Bond Building, which you can actually see work being done on that right now as we speak. Also still trying to finalize things with the Keystone Colorworks, ultimately finalize so that they can stay on track in terms of their timeline, with hopefully getting started from a construction standpoint and maybe realistically May of next year. In addition to, I know there's probably a couple of other things. Well, actually, there is a couple other things we've got in the hopper that potentially will be discussed next week at the Redevelopment Authority board meeting. So there's activity taking place, but again, I just think, from a staff standpoint, again, right now we've just slowed it down just because of, frankly, not wanting to do work that's not going to go anywhere, based off what we're seeing, particularly in Harrisburg and then with the budget.
Okay. Before we will bring it to a close and talk about our next meeting, let me just try to reduce to numbers the reality of why I really want to be positive. When we talk about CRIZ being a really great thing, here are the numbers. If a person got a mortgage for a new business facility for $1 million, at 6% for 25 years, they would pay $1,930,000 back to the bank for the principal and the interest. The interest on that, if they were in CRIZ, they wouldn't even participate in paying the $930,000 in interest. The $1 million that they pay back, they'd have to come up with 13 cents or 17 cents, I forget which one it is. It's the 5-to-1 ratio, it'd be 17. They have to come up with 17 cents on a dollar to be the original equity. And they don't even have to pay it back. I mean, that's their equity that would go in. So this is free money of $1,930,000 that's created $1 million worth of facility construction. So multiply that by 5 times if it's a $5 million facility, multiply it by 3 times if it's 3, and that's at 6%. At 8%, that's $2,315,000. And in the millions we're talking about, the projections, if you could believe them, are $380 million that would be available in grants, so to speak, or project investments that could be funded by the projected income stream of tax revenues from all of those 11 or 12 types of taxes. $380 million. I'm not willing to give up on that for our city. And I'm not willing to give up on the opportunity that people can get per million $1.93 million value for free. And I think that's a hell of an encouragement to start businesses in the city of York, and totally overrides anybody's complaint about what the tax rate is, or what the inspection fees are, or what the poor parking might be. That I'd say, come on, put on your big boy pants. We're giving you money, $1,930,000. I just want to leave that lay and try to give you some motivation to want to continue to do this as a CRIZ. I know of no program outside of someone dying and leaving a whole bunch of money to let you do what you want with. Now, as for meetings, I was going to say, why don't we skip next month, or then thinking with CRIZ, the general session isn't even going to come into play until after January's meeting that we would have anyway. But do you think if I would stop with this agenda stuff and just have a meeting with us and have you just talk about it, talk about development downtown, or people you know, or people who had ideas, or any brainstorming that we haven't been able to bring up to the table till now? I want to just meet and chit-chat.
Do you think we'll accomplish anything?
It'll keep us together, keep us thinking. Something might happen, as a matter of fact. If we can get a date on our calendar right now, and some legislation did get through, or if Pelagi won, or some act of God, that we would have a meeting on the calendar and not have to try to scurry around to find a date for it. We could always, we could have it, and if there's good news, we can talk about that good news. But if not, we can talk about anything that you wished we'd had talked about up until this point. You willing to put in a couple more meetings until we're finally defeated?
I'm inclined to wait and see.
You want to call a meeting on call?
Yeah, I don't care that much, one way or the other. I will come, talk, or I'll not come.
Gentlemen?
There's an advantage to scheduled meeting in that you can cancel it, should we not want to meet, but,
The risk you have there is I probably wouldn't cancel it.
I know. But,
So you should decide today whether you
okay.
want to bother having an hour. I promise we'll keep it to an hour because I won't have anybody invited.
I'm either way. I can go either way. I have no.
Dave?
I'm okay with an hour in January.
So skip December?
Skip December?
Yeah.
Okay.
That works.
Is that fair?
Yep.
Okay, so let's have, our next meeting then will be the second Tuesday in January.
One of the things that would be really helpful for me, and maybe it's because I missed the very beginning of this, I'd really like to see us work through that example that you just gave with $1 million, because I didn't think that it was that magical. I mean, I knew this was a great development tool, but I keep hearing things that, the one that you really wanted was the NIS, but there's only one of those, and the CRIZ is real. I mean, is it really the case that, that's like, I'm sorry, I don't mean this to sound smart alecky or come off that way, but it almost sounds like magic fairy dust. If it's really the case that it creates that much, then, that we ought to maybe get a lot more interest in this, because I don't have the sense that it's quite that magical. So I'd like to work through that and be able to ask some questions about it.
Okay, I think I'm not the only one saying it's magical. I think Charles might be thinking the same
I think it's
thing.
great, and I think it's a great development tool. I had no idea until what you just said that it was that momentous. That you
Dramatic.
could get that much impact for $1 million.
The risk is that the taxes don't follow, that the employees don't pay any taxes, or the businesses don't make any money, and the money doesn't come up to the table through the Department of Revenue, and even then, you have the opportunity to borrow money from, that's a long discussion
Yeah,
there, but that's the
okay,
only risk.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the only thing I would say is to take the Susquehanna Center, the project that the Pell built, and to look at all the employees in there and to think of their wages, the attorneys who are working there, there are plenty of high-end income people there. There's a couple of the corporate headquarters of Dentsply, et cetera. There are, of course, other operations that are just, modest income, but there's a lot of people working there. And if you just simply embrace that as part of your territory, you capture all of those taxes. And then going forward, it's not inconceivable that you could build one or two projects similar to that, and you'd be capturing all that revenue too. So,
Yeah, I'd just like to see that math.
okay, great. Somebody, yeah, maybe you can work something up, Bob.
Yep.
Yeah.
What I was, when Leonardo and I were just discussing is that it may be possible to get a copy of Lancaster and Bethlehem deals that have already been done and seeing the numbers that they've approved, and that would serve as that example.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That way you have actually two real projects with real numbers as opposed to something that's speculative.
Okay. Terrific. Thanks.
Michael, would you
Okay.
be here? I don't know how, like, staff time wise, are you allowed to come sit here with us? January. Well, we're not having a December meeting. It could be volunteer on your part, probably.
Volunteer, okay. That sounds
It
like
is
all the
for us.
overtime I've been putting in on the weekends. January for an hour won't be a problem.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll make it
It
work.
would be a silly discussion without someone from the city that could back up or refute something that we said.
Gotcha.
Thanks.
No problem.
Okay, any other business to come before the authority? If not, then the meeting is adjourned. And good luck, Leonardo. Okay.